Good evening and welcome. Welcome to those of you here in the room and those joining us online by webcast to this year's William C. Stubing Memorial Lecture, Navigating a Crisis of Trust, Ethical Policy and Practice in Uncertain Times. I'm thrilled to be here in New York this evening for what promises to be an important and timely conversation. I also want to extend my thanks to the Rockefeller University for hosting us here in this beautiful space. My name is Michelle Groman, and I am the president and CEO of the Greenwall Foundation, where we seek to make bioethics integral to decisions in healthcare, policy, and research. Our two strategic priorities are to shape and support a broad, inclusive bioethics and to increase bioethics' impact on policymaking. Tonight's lecture deeply reflects them both. Trust in institutions, expertise, and even evidence itself is faltering. And bioethics has a critical role to play as we consider how to navigate the current environment and shape paths forward. This is bioethics in a broad and fundamental sense. When confidence in health and science, policy and practice is lost, the consequences are profound. From the legitimacy of regulatory systems, to harnessing scientific knowledge that reflects all of the people who might benefit from it, to the ability to make informed individual choices. The impact on our health and well-being is real. Bioethics can provide a model for how to approach difficult situations, recognize shared values and common ground, and come together rather than turn away. This is the spirit that we gather tonight, to ask what it means to earn and sustain public trust in a time of deep polarization and rapid scientific change, and to explore how bioethics can help guide us toward greater integrity, accountability, and connection. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to reflect on Bill Stubing, the lecture's namesake. Bill served as president of the Greenwall Foundation from 1990 to 2011 and passed away in 2015. Under his leadership, the foundation developed its focus on bioethics and became the field's primary private funder. He understood that bioethics needed a pipeline of talent and oversaw the creation of the Greenwall Foundation's Faculty Scholars Program, which remains our flagship investment. Bill was an ordained Lutheran minister and educator who first served as headmaster of a parochial school and later turned his professional career toward medicine, ethics, and the arts. Although traditional in style, Bill relished radical ideas, regularly took risks, and as a funder sought out controversial, important work from which others shied away. The Greenwall Foundation's hope for the lecture that bears Bill's name is to model vigorous and civil discourse on bioethics issues that demand public attention. This evening's topic is exactly that sort of conversation. Bill's legacy continues to shape who we are as a foundation, and I'm deeply honored that we can continue to celebrate his life and impact through this lecture series. Now, a few quick housekeeping notes before we begin. We'll have about 20 minutes for questions from the audience at the close of our moderated conversation, and we will get to as many as we can. If you are in the room, we have cards to write your questions on available at your seats. You can hand them to one of our staff members. Can staff that's around give a quick wave? Folks you can hand them to? Thank you so much. If you are watching online, feel free to submit questions using the Zoom Q&A feature. The webcast is closed captioned, and we will be recording today's discussion and sharing it following the event. We'll send a link to all those who registered, both online and in person. I am now pleased to introduce tonight's moderator. Matthew Herper is a senior writer at STAT, where he covers medicine and leads the editorial programming for STAT's flagship events and summits. For more than 2 decades, he has reported on the promises and perils of medical innovation, from the development of groundbreaking therapies to the debates that shape public trust in science and medicine. Matt, I turn the stage over to you and invite you both up. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you to the Greenwall Foundation for having us, and thank you to Rob for being here. It is always great to see you. I don't think that Rob needs any introduction, but Robert McKinnon Califf was born and raised in South Carolina. and then traveled somewhat north, one state, to Duke, where he's been for most of his professional career, with a brief sojourn out in a couple really over your career in California. And while he didn't maybe range that much in geography, he did in subject matter and interests. The story of Rob Califf in clinical trials is very much the story of clinical trials and of medical evidence and of figuring out what works and what doesn't. In the 1990s, he helped run what is seen as one of the first cardiovascular megatrials, testing tissue plasminogen activator for heart attacks. It was a lesson in how to do a big study and had an idea behind it, the large simple trial, that still hasn't really been fully realized. However, in your role at Duke, you benefited a lot from drug companies doing what I like to call large, really complicated and expensive trials, and built a clinical research arm where you became one of the top, what people in the industry like to call key opinion leaders. I don't love the phrase. The companies turned to when they needed advice or someone to run a trial. You also became someone who was called on to kind of moderate when there was intense controversy, and to conduct, and you did a lot of conducting of studies where answers were found that were not what anyone predicted. And for instance, drugs that were thought to be perhaps a panacea or perhaps dangerous turned out to be neither and just not very effective. And you'll notice it took me a couple paragraphs to get to the point that probably brings a lot of people here, which you also served twice as the Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration. You were appointed commissioner in February 2016 and served until January 2017 under President Barack Obama, and then again under President Biden, which means you served during one of the toughest times in medicine in, I think, anyone's memory here during the COVID pandemic. So that gives us a lot to talk about. Again, welcome. So we're going to get deep into, Rob actually sent me a list of questions that he thinks we should talk about that could probably last an hour, and they were all fascinating, some of them really fascinating, but there's a couple things we want to ask you first. And the first, you've been talking about the FDA over the past, since January really, as Humpty Dumpty. The fear being that we'll have to put it back together. There's been a lot of news about personnel at the FDA, and you said that you're a fan of the new head of the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. Do you want to explain why? What do you like about Rick Pazder?
Oh, Rick, first of all, he's an oncologist, I'm a cardiologist, so there's friction that has to be understood. And literally, when I went to FDA in 2015, part of the story was I initially went as a civil servant. I was not a presidential appointee when I first went, and that was an amazing year before I was asked to be commissioner. But Rick and I used to have a dinner once a month where he would say the cardiologists were Neanderthal, and all they had to do was know 3 arteries, and that was it. And oncologists had this very complicated, precision medicine stuff. But out of that, I accused him of abrogating the responsibility of the FDA to require adequate and well-controlled studies to get drugs on the market. But out of that tension arose a lot of mutual respect. At least I hope it's true on his side. It certainly is on mine. And what I really admire about Rick, he has fidelity between his beliefs and his actions. He's an honest person and deeply driven to try to do what's right. And I don't always agree with him, but you can count on it when he says something that he's not saying it for some reason that you don't understand. It's what he really believes, and he can defend it. And he sticks by the truth. I think people know he's a very devout Catholic. He suffered, as a head of drugs at the FDA. He had this very tough time where his wife died of ovarian cancer. And, the way he handled that and put his energy into trying to make things better paying a lot of attention to what patients were saying they needed. The empathy for people with cancer has been part of his history. So I can't say enough good things about Rick. From a few other things just to mention. I'm a longtime academic, and there's a thing about great professors in academia. They see things that other people don't see. They often have ideas about how things should be done differently. And Rick is one of those people. His research conferences in the FDA are superior to anything I've seen in cancer centers out in academia. It's bringing together all that information, having the discussions in a way that leads to action. So I probably lauded Rick enough at this point.
But there's something very interesting that gets us right into ethics that you talked about, which is talking about turning your disagreement into a decision on how to move forward and having disparate perspectives. And lately we're seeing a lot at the FDA. We're writing a lot about tension spilling over out of the FDA that I can't tell whether some of it's clearly not productive, but I can't tell how much it's productive. Does that seem different from what happened at the agency than when you were there?
Well, this is where I feel like I have to give my little disclaimer. I'm twice a political appointee. I've been through 2 Senate confirmations. I've dealt with Bernie Sanders and Rand Paul at the same time in hearings. And I'm 74, and I'm not looking for a job, and I'm not looking for an NIH grant. So I feel like I'm totally liberated to say whatever I think is true. And I don't think it's right to say that duplicitous behavior never existed at FDA. I mean, a large part of the history at FDA has to do with the same things that you see in academia and business, of people looking out for their turf, often saying things that are different than what their actions are going to be because of power and all that. But just to be really clear, Humpty Dumpty to me does not refer to the FDA specifically. It refers to the country on what I think this administration is doing to the country. And a lot of what I think it's doing is saying things that lead people to believe that you have certain beliefs when what you're doing is actually the opposite of that. And operating in a system where, for example, the head of Health and Human Services is recommending that people not get vaccinated and has a history of saying that viruses don't cause disease, that causes a lot of moral anguish for people whose jobs it is to promote evidence to guide policy, as opposed to what's happening now, which is, I call it policy-based evidence. RFK decides the answer, scientists are dispatched, and if they don't get the answer, they don't bring back the evidence to support the policy, they get fired. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the resignation letters of Peter Marks and Kevin at FDA, Kevin Hall at NIH, and the whole band at the CDC, it's exactly the same theme. So, the Humpty Dumpty refers less to the FDA specifically. What I did say about FDA, I was on a plane early on when thousands of people got fired, and my email was exploding.
This was the plane next to Ned Sharpless from NCI.
And I just wrote a note that said the FDA as we know it is history. It's finished. And I think that's true. But I'm not saying it couldn't be better. I'm not saying it should go back to the way it was. I think there's going to be an opening to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. There's a little bit of an ethics story here too, I think. When I first referred to Humpty Dumpty, I got this avalanche of corrections from people that were experts. Humpty Dumpty originally was just one verse. And if you remember, all the king's horses and all the king's men could not put Humpty Dumpty back together again. But apparently the woke teachers of the world got together and decided we can't teach kids that you could never put Humpty Dumpty back together again. So there's a 5-verse version on the internet where in the 5th verse, Humpty Dumpty is put back together again. And I think that's what's going to need to happen. And I would hope that whatever our principles are, whatever our, one person in the audience today accused me of mistaking morality for ethics, which is, I think, is an interesting thing to talk about, but I would hope that whatever our principles are, that would be the guide to the policies that we would have. And I don't think that's the case right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, you joked before that many people think of ethics as the discipline of telling people what they can't do, but that you have a different definition.
Yeah, ethics to me is a way of thinking in an organized way about what principles are and how to balance what happens inevitably when you convert theory into practice, which is that there are conflicts that have to be balanced. And ethics should not tell you the answer, except you made this comment earlier tonight. There are some cases where I think ethics should tell you the answer, but for the most part, it's balancing these things and thinking in a rational way about what your principles are and then deriving your practical action based on that. Now, I was trained, I'm obviously not an ethicist. I was a clinician growing up, but I'm sort of an amateur ethicist because I spent a lot of time with Jeremy Sugarman and Kevin Weinford and Ross McKinney, and was very involved in empirical ethics, which I'm a huge fan of. I think empirical ethics unveils things that don't come from sitting in the library with your tweed jacket and pronouncing what the ethical answers are. So I'm very much a fan of that. But I am not hearing in the boardrooms of America or the health systems of America or our current government any discussion of ethics as even an issue to be thought about.
Well, I want to ask why that is, because you've seen inside those boardrooms, but you had 4 core principles. I think we should probably get them out there. Autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice.
Yeah, this is like ethics 101, the basics that, and an ethicist who's a real ethicist would, go into a lot more nuance, like much of everything. So if you just ask an LLM, what's the core principles of ethics? But you can immediately see that there are going to be conflicts. Like right now, for whatever reason, we've decided in our policies that autonomy takes precedence over everything else. At least that's my view of it. I mean, how can it be that the leading cause of death in our children is guns, and we can't have a reasonable conversation about what to do about it because of the view that it might interfere with some right that individuals have in the Second Amendment? I think a lot of the discussions about infectious diseases, and we'll see what happens this winter, and about vaccination are the same thing. Do you have a right for diseases which kill people to say, I'm not going to get vaccinated when it might imperil your neighbor's children or your neighbors? Those are questions, and you can see, it's just one example. You can see autonomy. It's an American thing more than any other society, as best I know. But you've got to have not harming other people as a value also. But that's not discussed. I mean, you'd think we're just all a bunch of rugged individuals, and if you just take care of yourself, everything's going to be fine. But there's another element that plays out, which is really what my biggest beef is right now, is that if you said running any organization, and this is true even of the Greenwall Foundation, I'm sure, you always have to balance finances and mission.
We don't have this problem in journalism at all.
No. There was a reason why I hated STAT initially, and you know what it was. Your headlines were completely different than what the story was.
We've been arguing about headlines since before STAT existed. Yeah. Let's say that.
And the purpose of a headline is to draw in the audience, and I understand that, but it's bothersome. So you're always trying to balance these things. But what's happened in our society is finance is way up here now, and in the case of healthcare, professionalism, well-being of the patient is at the bottom, and it's causing this enormous moral injury that we see in clinicians. And it gets to we'll get into this, but it gets to the trust issue in a very important way, I think.
How did that emerge? I mean, you've seen this as a clinician. You've had a career long enough to tell me this. Has there always been some moral injury and it's worse?
There's always been some. I mean, I was well known when I ran the intensive care units at Duke. If it was 2 o'clock in the morning and we had empty beds, sick people, but not enough nurses, because the nurses were pissed off because they weren't getting paid enough, I was well known for calling the administrators at 2 in the morning to say, I want to make sure you're awake and thinking about what you've done here. You know, those kind of things have always existed, but it's at a horrendous level right now. How did it get this way? I think it's one of those things in history where just a whole bunch of things happened that led us to be uniquely that way in America. There's certainly problems in other countries with healthcare system, like the NHS is basically falling apart right now. But if you look at sort of the underlying principles and beliefs, there's a fabric there of looking out for your neighbor, which we've lost here, at least in the boardroom. Now, and I think so, you know, when people ask what do you do to build back trust, I was so influenced when I was a young faculty member. We were working on clinicaltrials.gov because I was driven by the concept that it should be not ethically correct, if you balance everything, to do experiments on human beings and keep it secret. That just seemed to me like, just say, I'm doing secret human experiments. That doesn't sound quite right. But that was what was happening. So the Pharma CEO Roundtable asked me to come up and consult with them since I had some expertise, and their contention was that revealing their clinical trials would destroy their business model. But the person in front of me had just finished consulting with the tobacco and the oil industries. And his slides, I still have a copy of them. The key slide said, if you want to be trusted, act trustworthy. And I think that's the key. So why would you expect someone to trust our institutions when they can't get an appointment? Or when they do get an appointment, they spend 15 minutes or 10 minutes with a clinician who's upset and suffering from moral injury and trying to type into a keyboard while not paying attention to the person. You know, and then you advertise it. What health system doesn't advertise that they're patient-centric? Show me a person who, other than those who have concierge clinicians, who believes that our healthcare system is patient-centric.
I mean, it's a baffling thing because almost everyone, either themselves or through a family member, sees how the system works, including, one would assume, executives of companies, and that yet this keeps getting worse. I mean, you have, the story of your brother really touched me, that you should probably tell him, not me, but you've had a recent perspective on this. Yeah,
my little brother was a great orthopedic surgeon, great guy. He died last year of pancreatic cancer. He had the head of drugs at Cedar, head of oncology drugs, Rick Pazder, the very person we talked about, and Monica Bertinoli, a surgeon who was head of the NIH, weighing in on his care. But he was like a traveling roadshow, having to go like 8 different cancer centers looking to get a protocol that he could get into, you know, sick with pancreatic cancer and going from city to city. This is insane. I mean, the technology we have should make it so if you have a cancer that for which there's no available effective treatment, that there should be a system that, you know, links you up to wherever it is that the protocol is available. It's like, this is not a technological problem. It's an artifact of a system that puts finances and building moats around enterprises that deliver health care above the well-being of the patient. And it's so obvious. There's no amount of saying that we're seeking trust that's going to fix that. You actually have to fix the problem.
What would put ethics into that decision, making that? What would make...
Well, I mean, I think that this is one that I think is kind of a no-brainer, right? If you put those 4 principles up there and say in a system that's spending $5 trillion, how would you balance these features? I think you'd come up with a number of things that would make a lot of sense. But if you say we have a system that pays a lot more money for some things than for others, and that it's in the interest of our best academic centers to not share information because they want to be known as the place to which these people come, and it's in the interest of our pharmaceutical companies to charge a fortune for drugs that put, last I saw, it's approximately half of, maybe it's a third of cancer patients go bankrupt getting health care. You'd say, wait a minute, there's got to be a better way than this to distribute. But that would assume that you believe there's a value in the well-being of the patient population that you're serving. And there was a time about 20 years ago, and I think most people here remember it, when there was a lot of talk about every corporation should have an ethicist on the board. Not to tell them what not to do, but to raise the issue of how do you think about this problem from balancing these different principles that you're espousing. There is none of that. I don't know, maybe there's still some around. My interpretation of what pharma's doing with what they call ethicists, they call it access. It's not access.
Well, how would you define it then?
I would define it as putting together programs that gerrymander the system so some people can get drugs if they can fill out a whole bunch of paperwork to get a drug which is horrendously expensive.
Also very often making sure that if insurance will pay for part of it, the patient doesn't have to cover the rest.
Yeah.
So they get the money.
But the paperwork to do that is beyond the reach of most people. So if you look at the uptake in these programs, it's not great. If that was really the goal, was to give everyone who needed a drug access, we would be having a model where we made the drug available to a lot more people at a lower cost. I'm not a mathematical genius, but I think you can probably make that work out with still very good margins. But we have a system that operates in the other dimension. Fewer people actually getting the treatment, but a very high cost for it. Now, I'm not saying that pharma is the key issue here. I think pharma gets way too much grief. It's the health systems and the way they operate that's creating the bigger problem.
And the insurance system, obviously, and the middlemen in between.
Yeah. So here we are in 2025. I can't find anyone really knowledgeable about health policy who believes that the current U.S. system should be recommended to anybody. The data speak for themselves. We have the lowest life expectancy of any high-income country. We spend way more than other countries. The results are bad. You wouldn't buy it if you were buying a commodity.
You know, to hear you talk, you sound a lot like you want to make America healthy again.
Yeah.
I mean, these are a lot of the same complaints. I don't think I'm jumping to conclusions saying that you don't think a lot of the solutions being proffered actually fix these problems.
Yeah, I'm working on the graphics on this. I just can't bring myself to get it completed yet. But the way I see it is there's a highway that we're on that's going the wrong direction. And it has a number of traffic jams. It has a number of toll booths on it that are people taking money for transactions that add nothing to better health. And that part, the number of toll booths is growing substantially every day. And we have MAHA saying, okay, we need to go in a different direction, but they're going off into a ditch with unproven dietary supplements and not really addressing the things that they even identified as the major culprits. I mean, how can you scold people about the food they eat and then cut the money that they need in order to pay for the food that they need to eat, and then take away all of the efforts at EPA to deal with the environmental contaminants that were at the basis of so much of this. So what we need is to offer a different road. But MAHA should get credit for now most Americans. You remember Don Berwick when he declared that U.S. had the worst healthcare system, that he couldn't get confirmed as CMS director. Now most Americans can say, we have bad health in America and something needs to be done about it. So to me, the thing to do about it is to focus on the evidence. You know, what's different between, I was just in Ireland. They're very optimistic there. Their life expectancy is now 84.
It's a beautiful country.
Their police don't even have guns. I think they had like 2 gun murders in the last year or some crazy number like that. And what are these countries doing? Healthcare is a right, so they're not arguing about you have to have insurance to get seen. Primary care is a focus, and societal institutions are focused on things like child care and issues that enable people to have good health. We're doing the opposite right now. We're cutting out, making those benefits harder to get. So we need to go in a different direction. I mean, another part of this, I don't know how much this has to do with ethics, but, another part of this is we talk about we spend all this money on sick care, and we do, but I don't know about you, but if my aortic valve gets calcific, I would like to have a TAVR.
Yeah.
And
I've seen the Mick Jagger video. So.
Yeah, okay. And so I'm not arguing against doing a great job with people when they get sick. And I think no matter what we do, if we just delay it, people eventually get sick and die. There's the old quote, you probably heard me say this before, I didn't make it up, but life is a sexually transmitted disease with 100% mortality. So deferring all this doesn't do away with the need for these fabulous, I mean, if you get really sick, being in a U.S. hospital with adequate insurance is the best place in the world to be, as far as I'm concerned. But we're not putting any of our energy into the things that really have the biggest impact on people's health. Now, I can gerrymander that into an ethics argument because, you know, you can count the bodies and say this is not good for people. If you believe in not doing harm, we're doing a lot of harm right now, and the answers are in the other countries that are doing so much better than we are.
One thing that is different about the U.S., although it's happening worldwide, is this immense distrust of experts, and of medical experts in particular, and government medical experts probably in particular. And you mentioned infectious disease and vaccines. It's a good example, but we also have people don't take their statins. There seems to have been an abrupt lesion in trust during COVID. What do you think happened? I mean, you had a real view of that running the FDA. What do you think?
Well,
why do we have this? I'm abusing disease metaphors, but this metastasis of people having distrust for vaccines.
Well, I mean, I don't pretend to have the answer, but I have some thoughts, at least my views of it. First of all, it was a change in the trajectory, but the trajectory was already well underway before the pandemic. And it had gotten my attention when I was at the FDA enough to make me want to go to work at Alphabet, partly to try to understand all this, which I did for 5 years. And again, don't pretend to completely understand it. There's also a unique American component of this because medical freedom has been a much bigger issue in the whole history of the United States. If you go back and read the art, there's just a lot written about it, how deep in it probably goes back to the Revolution and the feeling about the British and all that way back. But we don't like having authorities telling us what to do. And we often believe we have better answers from our own experience. So I think it was already a setup. In addition to that, well before the pandemic, social media was beginning to take over. That was something I really had focused a lot of energy on, very unsuccessfully in terms of changing what was happening with it. So then along comes the pandemic and people are dying all over the place. That's really scary, and I think it just exacerbates the feelings that people already had. And then we can have an argument about whether mistakes were made in the way policies were portrayed to the public. And I don't really know People say, well, it should have been more humility. We'll see how all that plays out. And one reason I'm reticent to draw conclusions now is that there is a historical precedent, which was the pandemic of 1918. And the historians wrote very deeply about how for about 3 years after that was done, no one would talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the same stuff. They called it pandemic amnesia. It's like it never happened. But all these things had happened. And there were rebellions against masking then also. So I don't know. I am focused right now on one part of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know whether, humility I think is always a good thing. It should be
Sure.
part of a good life as far as I'm concerned. But, and you learn this in intensive care unit practice. You're in an intensive care unit. There's a sick person there, and something needs to be done.
Right.
And in some cases, you have irrefutable evidence that 100% of experts would agree on,
Mm-hmm.
and you do that. In other cases, 51% of experts agree on one course and 49% agree on an entirely different course. You still have to make a decision, and not making a decision is making a decision. And that's, in a pandemic, to me, it's exactly the same thing, except it's the whole population that
Right.
you're dealing with it. And I don't think a good job was done of expressing to people the dimensions of uncertainty that existed. And
They're headlines.
what's that?
They're headlines.
Yeah. So, but I think, what I'm working on now is I think for everyday medical recommendations, that's an element, because of what we're going through now with distrust in all expertise, it's really important to distinguish for people where there really is a consensus about the right answer for whatever the problem is, and where there's not consensus, but you still have to make a decision.
Mm-hmm.
And I think acknowledging that 30% of people who are experts completely disagree with what the general recommendation is would be very helpful in dealing with the uncertainty that exists.
It would also let you point to the things where there is actually no debate, like measles vaccine.
Right. Well, you say no debate, but
Well, among experts.
among experts, I agree with that. There's also there's an element of this where I think there's a majority view now that you shouldn't present to the public like, here's what you should do as a directive.
Mm-hmm.
You should more present options and not have mandates of any kind. I'm not sure when all is said and done, when the dust settles, where that's going to fall out.
Mm-hmm.
I think when people are in trouble, they don't necessarily want somebody saying, I don't really know what to do, but there's some chance this might be good. I think they are looking for direction. And so I think what we need to work on in communication is how to be strong in your recommendation and then point to this dispersion of views. By the way, this should drive us where there is uncertainty to resolve the uncertainty by generating evidence.
I want to get to that in a second,
Yeah.
because I think it's a big point for us. But very particular flashpoint in that COVID discussion was vaccine myocarditis, which seems to be having a huge effect on how the FDA is acting now, based on some of the reporting of one of my colleagues recently, Lizzie Lawrence, who's amazing. You should all read Lizzie's stuff. But there seems to be a lot of, this is one of these issues where on the right it's seen as this huge mistake that was made. You're a cardiologist, you were at the FDA. Do you have any thoughts on the myocarditis?
I have thoughts, and there may be data I'm unaware of right now, but I think the American Heart and the American College of Cardiology have taken a really hard look at this. Cardiologists know that there are a lot of, if you have the flu, there are a lot of people walking around with inflammation of the myocardium, just like you have inflammation of the lining of the lungs and a cough and all sorts of other things. You could say that's myocarditis, or you could say it's just a mild manifestation of the flu. Then there's some people who get sick where the heart muscle is not contracting adequately and have real heart failure. That's the real deal. And so in the spectrum, knowing exactly the right spot is hard to say, but at least from everything I've seen, the risk of getting myocarditis if you're infected with COVID is much greater than the risk of getting myocarditis if you get vaccinated. And what's happened is, as we've now had a large proportion of the population exposed to COVID and or vaccinated multiple times, the rate of myocarditis, clinically evident myocarditis, in post-vaccination patients has gotten very low. And at least from what I saw as I was leaving, the FDA no higher than the basal rate in the population. So that's a long-winded way of saying, yeah, I think it's being overplayed relative to the benefits of vaccination. I wrote about this just this month in JAMA Internal Medicine, so for people that want to, interested in my thoughts, for what it's
Another
worth.
thing you've talked about I wanted to make sure we hit on here was the health of men and the crisis among the health of men. I'd actually just love to hear your thoughts there. This is something you mentioned to me, and I thought this was a really interesting thing for you to talk about.
I mean, if I'm, trying to sound important, what I would say is I hope that my thinking about health-related issues are driven by looking at the evidence, seeing what the problems are, and then trying to find a solution to those problems. And, we've been through centuries of mistreatment of women. And so there have been a lot of efforts made to improve that situation, and they've been pretty successful with still work left to do. Person that expressed this much better than me is Richard Reeves, who's at one of the foundations in Washington. And Melinda Gates actually gave him one of the 10 grants. It was for women's health, but for men. But I believe if you look at the situation today, young men in particular are really hurting. The suicide rate is 4 times the rate of young women. Many of them are in basements playing video games. I think the number is something like 30% of men under age 25 have never asked a female for a date, person to person. There's a lot of loneliness. Women under age 30 are out earning men now. Part of the situation, if I'm to believe what I've read from the polls, is that among women, men who are of a lower status are not very desirable. So so now 70% of college graduates are female. And so still at the top, if you look at CEOs, we've still got this issue going on where we need more women.
Right.
But if you look at what's happening in universities and in society at that level, men are in pretty bad shape. And that's on top of the fact that the OECD data just came out today, and the U.S. is unique in this regard in terms of not doing well, because it's one of, I think, 4 countries where the gap between life expectancy of men and women is growing. So our men were already dying 4.5 years earlier than women. Now it's almost 5.5. So I would just say it was a frustration for me in the last administration. If I ever said we need to do something about men, people sort of nodded their heads and just went on to the next thing. And I think we've got to pay attention to this, or we'll pay a big price 20 to 30 years from now.
Why do we continuously make the ethical mistake? You mentioned being in the ICU and not knowing what treatment to use for a lot of things, and you got to do something. Why do we so often make the ethical mistake of not collecting the data as a society, we make the mistake of not collecting the data to figure out what the answers are? I mean, you've spent so much of your life in evidence generation. We do it when a drug company has a huge profit motive to do it, for the most part. And there's all sorts of questions in common practice that just don't get answered. Why is that? It seems like the most obvious thing. Put a lot of money into figuring out what works.
There are a bunch of people in this room who have put years of thinking into that.
Yeah,
question,
make them all
I would
mad
say.
so they can ask questions.
But I think we have conflict. We have inner conflicts between us conflicts about these values that are at the core of all this, that if we don't explicitly discuss them, we make big mistakes. That's what I believe. And I think I think part of what's happened in the last 20 years in the U.S. is if you look at the automation phenomenon, and it's in hyperphase now with AI. There's a meme that used to go around, math is hard, let's go shopping. Remember that one? I think what's going on now is clinical outcomes are hard, let's count money. And so it's so much easier to figure out how to calculate an operating margin than it is to know whether whatever you're doing is improving or hurting the outcome of patients or people in general. And then once you get in the way of the money, you're just a problem because you're suggesting that people do things differently. And that leads to a situation which I think is rampant right now of if we don't measure it, then we don't have to acknowledge that it exists. And that is a big problem. The solution, I think, is people have to stand up. This is where leaders need to stand up, but if there was an ethicist in the room saying, wait a minute, let's step back and look at what you're doing. I'm not telling you what to do, but here's a structured way to think about this problem. It might lead people to behave
You still have
differently.
the problem that the number of lives saved can't buy the CEO's Porsche.
Well, it could if we aligned the finances. I mean, to me, the ultimate way to do this, and this is where I do think countries in Scandinavia, Singapore have done a really super job of this. I know we don't want to go on much longer before we get to questions, but we recently had a policy meeting in a nice place. And my rendition of one thing that happened, I did a lot of work in Singapore in my career, and the Singaporeans were there. And they said, our biggest problem is our average teenager is expected to live to be 100 years old. We said, well, we have a solution. It's called guns and opioids. You don't have to worry about living to be 100. But then they said, here's our list of problems, and here's what we're doing to address those problems, because our societal value is that people should live a long and healthy life, and they want to be with their families. So nursing homes in Singapore are basically empty because you're subsidized to take care of your family. We said, here's our list of problems, but we're doing something entirely different as our focus. We're not really addressing what we know our major problems are, because that upsets the financial juggernaut that currently is going on.
Is it time to switch card decks? We're playing a different card game now. So, pre-submitted question. How can institutions adopt greater transparency as a strategy for addressing distrust? What are the most promising opportunities and greatest challenges, barriers you foresee? It's a great question, but give me one opportunity and one barrier, or we'll be here a long time.
Well, I mean, I think it's not a barrier, but the problem with transparency is that it will show what's actually going on, and it's not good. So I think the solution to it, the opportunity would be to begin to actually address the problems that are so obvious and to provide transparency. I had an experience in the Duke Health System where we did a massive community engagement thing with the people of Durham, which is a very heterogeneous population, majority minority, and then you've got the university in the middle of it with people like me. The number one and two things that people wanted, they wanted a unified health record, so they went from one place to I'm talking about health and medicine now, not a lot of other issues. A unified record, so wherever they went, people had a common understanding of what their issues were and how to deal with them. And they wanted clinics in their neighborhoods where they live. And this is not new thinking that this should happen, but when you make your money giving chemotherapy, it sort of leads to a focus on putting the money elsewhere. we actually shared the financial data with the community of Durham. They actually handled it well. So maybe it's not so bad to be transparent and then get the people whose lives are at stake involved in helping to find the solutions.
It's fascinating. You're going to love this one. How can we hold members of the media more accountable such that facts are able to overcome the shock value of disinformation and the constant desire for more engagement?
How would you answer that?
Well, one of the things I would say is that we need to fix social and search and give them some incentive for making the content that does well be the content that people should see. And we need to fix the financial models behind media so that there are public-facing organizations, or more of them, as the newspaper industry dies off, that can support their finances. But I also think certainly we all have a job to overcome the shock value of disinformation, but we're all trying, and it isn't easy. So, I mean, you have tried to speak out there yourself. It's hard to break through, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think the press is subject to exactly the same thing that I was talking about. I mean, how many of people like you have lost their jobs over the last decade?
Look what just happened at the Journal, right?
Yeah.
So.
And then we have these algorithms which drive to our most bestial instincts. I was so influenced when I was at Google. I called a guy named Carl Bergstrom, who was he studied evolution of species using big data, but he got interested in the internet. And he just made the point that the natural arc of algorithms, if you leave them to themselves, go in a negative direction.
Mm-hmm.
Because the things that get us looking the most at social media, and that looking the most really equates to advertising revenue.
Right.
Are the most outrageous, things that arouse us. And we also have these circuits that cause us to get addicted to that, so that we're just like you're waiting for your next hit of opioid, you're waiting for the next hit of the next screen that you look at. And one of the most amazing things to me is that it does look like the GLP-1 drugs reduce the amount of doom scrolling. And
so maybe they'll
trials.
fix obesity and make us stop.
Well, at least reduce it.
Yeah.
So it's telling you that this is not just a purely social thing. There's a biological basis for this also that's part of the issue. But with regard to the press, we have to, if we don't fix the financial model, I'm really worried about where this is going.
Mm-hmm.
It's caused me to actually subscribe to things on the internet that are legitimate and pay money, even though my instinct is, why do I have to pay for something on the internet? But
my
but if we don't pay for it, how are you going to?
I like being entirely ad supported and getting tons of page views, but it doesn't support the kind of work I want to do.
That's right. It leads you down that same.
I've experienced
avenue.
it firsthand. So.
But we keep coming back. I mean, the message to me is overcoming a negative trend in anything that you do requires the courage to speak up. And if enough people speak up, things change. And I'm hoping that will happen.
So subscribe to us and keep us honest. Kyle Ferguson from Hunter College. Trust is one thing, trustworthiness is another. Is the current FDA, not Rick, specifically excluding Rick, trustworthy?
Here's where I do hesitate a bit. I don't want to give quotes that will be quoted. And so what I'll say is, if you look at the corpus of the FDA, when I left, there were about 19,000 people. It's down to, I don't know what the number is now, maybe 16,000. Almost all those people are civil servants. I have complete faith in their trustworthiness. Their mission is public health. They do what's right. And that if you look at, there are a few things that make it into the headlines about FDA decisions, but 95% of FDA decisions are happening like in drug and device development or food safety inspections, all these things. yeah, I think.
You think that stuff's still mostly working?
Oh yeah, the objection I have, which I will just be vocal about, you know this, the history of the FDA, political appointees have had a policy that policies are political, but decisions about individual products are risk-benefit to be done by civil servants. The minute you have political people stepping in to override the civil service, that opens the door to all kinds of influence and corruption. And I'm not saying there's corruption going on now, but it just makes it possible. Because, and people say, well, FDA made a bad decision. My answer to that is, show me a better system than in a situation where there's a rule book which is set through political policy, the view of the
Do you
population.
feel the rule book is not being followed as closely?
I think when politicians have an undue influence, and specifically the Secretary of HHS, I don't think he knows what the rule book is. I mean, there's...
And on vaccines or on, I don't know, HRT for postmenopausal women?
If you actually look at what happened with the guidance on HRT, it didn't really change much. So I think here we have to separate rhetoric from what's actually happening. And there's a big role of civil servants of FDA. If you look at what eventually, same thing with Tylenol, there's some things said at a press conference that, you know, in my view, were just over the top and wrong. But if you look at what actually came out written from the FDA, it just said, you know, consult your doctor and don't use Tylenol unless you need to. Well, that was the advice before. So,
but at the press conference, it was don't give your child Tylenol.
Right, and I think the president went off the rails there, but that shouldn't be a big shock.
So Alexis Walker from Columbia.
But the trust and trustworthiness, that's the message to me, is I'm tired of people saying, what do we do to gain trust? And my answer is act trustworthy. But that means you have to confront these issues that are obvious that we're not confronting.
How can institutional boards at universities be reformed to prioritize justice?
You mean, you say you mean
you mentioned the role of ethicists of institutional boards. Yeah, I think it means. I think it means
not IRBs.
I think this means boards of directors, not IRBs.
I can just tell you that my interactions with nonprofit boards, particularly health systems and for-profit companies, and I've done a lot of work with them, they don't look any different. Their quarterly financials, people drive the workers to produce more revenue, and particularly margin-generating revenue. Ask any clinician in the US about this, you get almost the same answer every time. So the solution to that is to put people on the boards who actually have a view of the balance. Not to say we should disregard finance, you have to make money, but to come up with a way to balance these objectives. And I don't know of any other way than to put different people on the boards.
What do you hope the next generation of regulators, researchers, and journalists learn from this era of mistrust? How should they lead differently?
You know, we've already talked ad nauseum about the act trustworthy part of this, but I would add to it now, we're just in a different era of the way people communicate, and I don't think it's going back. And so we need to develop a way for those of us that are in positions of privilege, whether it's making decisions that affect other people like FDA employees or healthcare professionals or journalists, we need to develop a way of communicating that speaks to the way people currently communicate. And I'll just give an example that I'm working pretty hard on right now. I sort of gave up on university leaders a while ago. I mean, my sentinel question is, how many of you know who Mr. Beast is? There's some. Okay, 664 million followers as of this week. I looked it up. And, you know, it's on YouTube, and they're short vignettes. My grandkids all follow Mr. Beast carefully, and whatever he says, a few million people are likely to try to do it. Now we can say that's ridiculous, or we can say, wait a minute, this is affecting what people do. If we care about their health, we need to get involved in communicating the same way. So now working with students, we have a society we call Aletheia, which is the Greek goddess of truth. And the idea is use social listening. But this is not about what chemotherapy should you get or which cardiac valve should you get. It's the things that are bothering people. Like right now, if you did social listening, there would be a lot about Tylenol. There would be a lot about hormones and menopause. There are a few other hot button issues. The methods to decide what the best answer is are the old-fashioned methods. It's evidence ingestion, meta-analysis, parameterize the different views among experts. But then the message, the court said the FDA can only communicate using data. We were specifically forbidden from using emotive messages on Twitter. Remember the famous tweet that went viral? Don't be a horse, don't be a cow, don't take ivermectin. Best message the FDA ever put out. We lost in court on that message. But students, because the other thing that I've really come to believe is that propaganda wins just by sheer volume. I think the secret at Google in their advertising behemoth is not cleverness in terms of how the ads look, it's just the volume, it's just there.
That pair of shoes follows you around the internet until you buy it.
So, but if you want to tell the truth, you actually have to spend time. And there's a great quote from Yuval Harari, truth is a rare commodity on the internet, a rare type of information. Truth is behind the firewall, lies are free. And if you want to tell a lie, you can just make it up. You're not, and you adjust your lie based on the feedback that you get. That's the way the internet works. If you want to tell the truth, you've got to make sure you have the truth, and then you have to explain it. You're at a big disadvantage. So what we're hoping to do as student chapters around the country is to develop there's 600,000 of them. If you combine medicine, nursing, pharmacy, PhDs, postdocs, what if they were just putting out a massive amount of reliable, truthful information? You can't do that about everything, but about the topics that people are concerned about. So that's one approach to it. We'll see. It'll probably fail like most things I try to do, but maybe it'll work.
Sounds fun anyway. Matthew Herper, there have been a lot of attacks on medical and professional integrity, including calling core values like empathy weak. How should professional organizations respond, and have you seen successful approaches to this from professional organizations?
I would say yes. The attack on the core values, to me, that's a matter of stressing professionalism. And a slide I like to show now, I asked Gemini, show me the values for medicine as a business and the values for medicine as a profession. And they're very distinct, and they're interesting to compare. And I think a lot of this is just reminding people, because I think a lot of us want to do the right thing, but in the course of a busy day, we get distracted. Now, it would help if we didn't beat the crap out of clinicians to just generate more RVUs, which is how they feel right now. And I think that leads to a lot of bad behavior and patient interactions. Not spiteful, mean behavior, but just being distracted, and people recognize that. So much of this to me is just calling attention to the issue and having the courage to do that when it's a pain in the ass.
How would you describe the ideal healthcare ethicist? Is it someone from outside healthcare? Is it a clinician with with ethics expertise? Is it a philosopher with clinical training? Is it a philosopher with no clinical training? Is it something else? Is it you know it when you see it?
Like everything today, this is just my opinion. I'm not excited about philosophers. They're fine. But to me, when it comes to something that's practical like healthcare, that's very real, It should be people who understand what actually goes on in the practical application of whatever it is. I don't care what their background is. It could be, I like people who are busy clinically, but also spend time in ethics. I think that's a good. But, like a lawyer who, gets very interested and can really teach about it, that's just as valuable in my view. But to me, right now, what we need are people who are willing to get their hands dirty. Less, now I'm not saying this is happening, I just think people are disregarding ethicists for the most part now. But people are willing to step into the arena. Most of you have probably seen the man in the arena Roosevelt thing that everybody in Washington carries around because it's the only way to stay sane in the midst of all that. But I just think it's so much better to get bloody and try to do what's right. But I don't think that whether you're a clinician or not, I don't think that's the distinguishing feature. I think we need both.
Do you think there's a correlation between the vacuum of ethicists and the trend in young men in particular, and men having more health problems that you discussed?
I wouldn't say that the lack of attention to ethicists is the cause for young men's dismay, but I would say that a clear-eyed view of the whatever the principles are that are leading our society to allow this to happen and not try to do much about it is a good role for ethicists right now, for weighing those things. This is really complicated because, we've got these crossing streams. As I said, CEOs, we have a shortage of women. Tenured professors, we have a shortage of women. University graduates and grad students, surplus of women. I made the veterinary schools rounds because of H5N1, and Cornell was very excited because they had achieved 20% of their applicants are now men. That's the best in veterinary schools now, just as an example. So I think it is a role for ethicists to just say, wait a minute, let's stop and let's look at what's going on, and here's a structured way to think about it.
What is the role of bioethics in this administration? If there is a role, how do bioethics leaders generate stronger influence? How can they actually be heard?
I don't know the details, but I'm told that most of the bioethics components of the government have been disbanded. And I think that's telling you something. Many of you probably know better than me, but I think it's very purposeful because calling attention to these issues would be very inconvenient for what's happening. I don't know what an ethicist says about what happened to AID, for example. There are already hundreds of thousands of people who have died or now have HIV who wouldn't had we not done that. To me, that's an ethics issue, but one way to deal with that is just say we don't need ethicists in our government, and I think that's what's going on.
What do you think about AI's role in decision-making in healthcare? Mr.
We're at the end
worked
now,
at
but
Alphabet.
No, I think in relation to everything I've been talking about, I think one of the real potential advantages of AI is that AI per se doesn't care what the things are that cause us to not look at the real picture of what's going on. So to me, the biggest thing about AI, I think I've been dealing with algorithms my whole career. I'm not a mathematician. I think I have some kind of recessive gene in math, though, because both of my sons can do very high dimensional math and have done it for a living. And to me, AI, instead of just being a simple regression equation, it's a huge equation that can be the entire universe of information. But then you have a dependent variable. The question is, what is that dependent variable? Right now, the biggest use of AI in healthcare is to separate people from their wallets. It's to identify the people from whom you can make money. If the dependent variable had true true multivariate. That is, the dependent variable has several dimensions at the same time. You could end up in a very logical way to weigh these different possible outcomes and how changes in policy would affect them. And I think AI is intrinsically made to do that. But whether it does that is going to be dependent on who controls what the dependent variable is. And another great role for ethicists saying, what is it we're solving for? In other words, we can solve problems that we couldn't solve before. Question is, what's the problem we're solving for?
There's a great conversation on LLMs and that, but I want to ask this last question. We're technically at time, so I'm going to challenge you to give us a headline. Do you think the country will come out of this crisis of mistrust and misinformation? And what would that look like? What would a good, ethical, new normal be?
I'm sure it will come out of it. I don't know how long it will take. I have been advocating for Humpty Dumpty to be put back together in a different way. And to me, it would be accepting that we can't go back on the digital world that we're now have entered into. And it's going to have to be regulated in some way that returns people to more communal values about how we affect each other and how we interact with each other. I know this sounds bad to some people, but I think if we took the good parts of Scandinavia, Singapore, even UK in many ways, and just adjusted them a bit, so that, for example, we said having 400 million guns is probably not a good idea, and there's no reason we have to have guns as the leading cause of death of our children, then let's do something about it. We could. And I also think there's no reason why in a digital world, given the amount of resources we have, that every human being could have a nutritious diet from birth, just as one example. And I'm optimistic it could happen. I mean, one just little thing that had a big impact on me, I spent 7 years in California, but I never really had absorbed the vastness of California's agricultural system. Because of H5N1, I had to do that. California could feed the whole U.S. I mean, growing food now is something we're really good at, and with recombinant engineering, healthy food is something we can do. But right now, we're subsidizing bad food to a very large extent as a set of policies that could be changed. So I think it would be, the world, one in which everyone was registered and alive digitally and had access to certain basic human rights, is a very possible world. But, I still love the quote, America always does the right thing after exhausting all other possibilities. And I think we're in the process of exhausting all the other
We might have a
possibilities
lot of possibilities to exhaust them.
It's possible, but if the right people spoke up about the right ethics, maybe we could get where we need to go faster.
All right. Well, that's a nice, hopeful thought to end on. Thank you very much to all of you.